This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Alzheimer's live chat. We'll give you all just a few minutes to get logged in. And in the meantime, I'm going to just start with some introductions and some housekeeping items. So again, hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lakelyn Hogan. I'm gerontologist and caregiver advocate for Home Instead Senior Care. And again, want to thank you so much for joining us today for our Alzheimer's live chat. Our live chats are brought to you by Home Instead Senior Care, a network of locally owned franchise offices. The Home Instead Senior Care Network offers in-home care with an individualized approach to help keep your loved one safe and independent at home. And to learn more, you can visit homeinstead.com. And before we get started, I wanted to go over just a few housekeeping items. So first and foremost, we want to let you know that the lines have been muted for all of our participants. That's to reduce the background noise. We also want you to be comfortable moving about your space. We don't want you to have to worry about, if the doorbell rings or the dog barks or someone enters the room. Have no fear, we cannot hear you on our end. But we do want to hear from you via the chat box with any questions that you might have. So you can type in questions at any time for our guest on today's live chat. There's no such thing as a silly question. Please don't be shy. Other people are most likely having similar questions to yours. And the great thing about this community is we learn from one another. So again, please at any time, feel free to submit your questions. And if you want to submit them anonymously, there is an option to check before submitting your questions. So feel free to do that. And then we are recording today's webinar, so no need to take notes. You can go back and listen to it. We will send the recording out via email, usually within 24 hours. We also post the recording on our website, helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. So once you get that the emailed recording, you can forward it on to a friend, family member, or someone you think would really enjoy listening to today's chat. Or if you want to re-listen to portions of it, you can, of course, feel free to do so. That is all the housekeeping items that I have for us today. So now that everyone's settled, we'll go ahead and jump into today's topic. So today we're going to talk about living with hope after a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And when you look in the media and the information surrounding Alzheimer's and different types of dementia, the message of living with hope is not always making the headlines. However, it's a really important conversation that we're really excited to have on today's live chat. It is possible to live with hope, especially for those in the earlier stages of the disease. It's possible to maintain independence, to continue to pursue your passions, and to make a difference in the world. And to talk more about this topic, we are delighted to have our guest experts by experience, Jim and Geri Taylor, with us to share their story. So Geri Taylor is a retired healthcare executive. She's living with the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, along with her husband and care partner, Jim Taylor. They are experts by experience. They're raising awareness about the disease by telling their story nationally. The couple was featured in the New York Times special Fraying at the Edges, and they continue to share their experience through speaking engagements and advocacy efforts with Us Against Alzheimer's and in other various ways. So welcome, Geri and Jim. We're very excited to have you both with us today. Thanks so much for being here.
Lakelyn, thank you, Lakelyn, very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for inviting us to participate. We're delighted to share our story and join your audience. Geri, why don't you begin by sharing with us what you first noticed with the early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease?
I had been aware of the history of my father, aunt, and cousin, who all exhibited signs of Alzheimer's in their mid-60s. So with these genetic clues, I was vigilant to possible symptoms, which began to develop in my early 60s. For example, I had an incident of totally losing my train of thought in a meeting with my staff. At another time, I got off the subway in New York City to find myself at 14th Street and not knowing why I was there. Also, I became unable to prepare meals while having other people in the kitchen talking to me. Finally, one morning in the fall of 2012, at the age of 69, I woke up and looked in the mirror and said to myself, is that what I look like? I didn't recognize my own image. That was the beginning of accepting that a new view of myself and all of my life was necessary. Jim and I subsequently visited a neurologist who, after testing, diagnosed me with mild cognitive impairment. So, Jim, what was your reaction to this news?
So how does one react when your life is turned upside down? For Geri, the diagnosis confirmed what she had suspected. But for me, it was ballistic. I had not for a moment accepted that my brilliant wife might have any neurological impairments other than normal aging. So I responded in the usual male fashion. I went into my cave. I was depressed and non-communicative for 2 weeks. How's that for being a good, supportive husband? I did not want to lose my wonderful partner. This was not the retirement I wanted. It's not why I had moved to New York City. In fact, I'd married a nurse to take care of me. Yeah, I think those are probably normal reactions that one might have expected in retrospect, but I certainly didn't ever plan on acknowledging them in front of an audience. So Geri was patient, and when I was through feeling sorry for myself, I was ready to support her and move on and address the questions and the issues that we needed to think about. But how were we to respond to this rather significant diagnosis? After serious thought and discussion, we arrived at 3 general objectives. First, we had to each, in our own way, reconcile ourselves to and accept the diagnosis. Second, we had to decide when and what to tell other people, most importantly, our own children. And then we had to address how to set this new life of ours in order. In regards to accepting the diagnosis, Geri and I have had to each, in our own way, find acceptance. And of course, we continue to deal with this process each and every day. There is an equanimity that comes after crises that strengthens one in the knowledge that this situation too can be borne, can be accepted, and can even be transforming. And so it continues for us. But the wisdom comes not in just how we accept this situation, but in how we live with it day by day, allowing it to gradually transform us, making us into new individuals, shaping who that person will become. A mournful, bitter person, or a stronger person, a person who lives with courage and purpose and passion. Our time is short, but we can all make a choice. So Geri, how did you go about accepting the diagnosis?
After learning my diagnosis, I sought advice from Dr. Smith, a therapist I had seen for my retirement transition. When I first shared the Alzheimer's diagnosis, Dr. Smith tried to convince me that it was simply incorrect. As I finally overcame these doubts, that the advice was strong and direct: tell no one. If I shared the news, people would back away and I would lose friends. I was stunned by this response and managed to finish the session on a friendly, if strained, basis. I did not return.
So this visit was somewhat of a watershed moment for us, wasn't it? Did you decide to be silent?
Well, Dr. Smith's advice caused many hours of discussion and soul searching for Jim and I. But we decided that we could not join the conspiracy of silence. Rather than be silent, we have shared openly and directly about the disease at every opportunity through our presentation and around the country. Programs such as this one and in the wonderful article in the New York Times.
And what message do you share, Geri, in these presentations? What is your philosophy toward living life with the encumbrances of Alzheimer's disease?
We have chosen to continue to live life fully as possible for as long as I am healthy. We know that harder days lay ahead for both of us, but while we are able, we will live our days with passion, pursuing those dreams, ideas, and opportunities not yet realized.
And so is Dr. Smith right? Have people pulled away from you?
No, not at all. No one has backed away. In fact, the outreach to me in all my relationships has grown in warmth and depth. Time is more real. Love is more expressed.
And Geri, what are some of these strategies for living, the methods that you have to remain independent for as long as possible?
On a daily level, I've given myself these directions. While walking, talk only when necessary. Falling, and I have, is very common and an early sign of Alzheimer's. Keep things as neat as possible and reduce the number of things. Walk and take taxis or trains as a substitute for driving. Take yoga or exercise classes to improve balance. Maintain reading by choosing books with straight line plots and fewer characters. Keep my smartphone with me at all times. And lastly, and most importantly, stay involved in daily reflection on the importance of living in relation to self and others.
So our resolution to live full lives at this time led Geri to find a tutor for her bird photography, a lifelong hobby. I took professional acting lessons and was actually cast in a professional production, ironically about a man with Alzheimer's disease. But our passion really became Alzheimer's activism. Being the subject of a major article in the New York Times titled Fraying at the Edges gave us a national platform for speaking engagements and participation in advocacy groups to spread our positive philosophy of living with hope and passion. My most significant passion has become my efforts to triple the number of people currently in Alzheimer's clinical trials. I'd like to digress from our journey for a few minutes and talk to you about clinical trials. In the past few years, we have made progress in the level of government funding for Alzheimer's research. And currently, there are a number of exciting drugs in the research pipeline. But there is a crisis in the extraordinary low number of people living with the disease who participate in clinical trials. Less than 5 to 10% of those living with Alzheimer's are participating. And this problem has become a critical bottleneck in delaying the discovery of a cure. Many researchers are excited about the 99 drugs currently in the later stages of the clinical trial process, believing that some could possibly alter the outcome of the disease. But just to test these 99 drugs, we must double or triple the number of participants currently in trials. Geri is participating in a very promising trial at the Yale University Alzheimer's Research Center. It was only there, in applying for a trial, that she was definitively diagnosed with Alzheimer's, ending our uncertainty. There she gained an outstanding medical and neurological team to monitor her health on a monthly basis. Alzheimer's is their only expertise, and they are the experts. They best understand what Geri is experiencing. They best answer her questions, and they are most capable of educating us about the disease and what we are experiencing and what we will experience in the days ahead. All of this aside searching for a cure to the disease. They're also available to us around the clock. Many of you may know also that 50% of those living with Alzheimer's carry an inherited disease, inherited gene we'll call E4. This gene significantly increases the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's. Individuals carrying the disease usually develop Alzheimer's in their 60s and 70s, younger than those who do not carry the gene. Geri discovered that she's carrying 2 E4 genes, one from each parent. This means that she has definitely passed the gene to her son and possibly her granddaughter, increasing their likelihood of developing Alzheimer's. For those who carry the E4 gene, 50% of everyone with Alzheimer's, participation in a clinical trial is not just about finding a cure. It's also a matter of protecting their descendants from Alzheimer's. One thing we know for certain is that the first person who will be cured from Alzheimer's will be a clinical trial participant. Many folks don't realize that clinical trials are absolutely free for participants and their insurance companies. And also, a number of trial sites have now added free transportation to and from the clinic for new participants. Some folks don't participate in trials because they fear receiving the placebo. But as I tell my friends, if you don't join a trial, you're definitely on the placebo for the rest of your life. Placebo patients receive the same outstanding care from the medical and neurological team as those patients receiving the medication. I'm also very happy to share with you that within a few weeks, the Alzheimer's Advocacy Organization, Us Against Alzheimer's, will be adding a new tool on their website at usagainstalzheimers.org. That's one word, usagainstalzheimers.org, called Curing Alzheimer's. Clinical trials are the key. This will be a toolkit that will include complete information about being in a clinical trial, an Alzheimer's clinical trial, how to find a trial, what the testing is like to get into a trial, the different phases of a trial, and what's expected of you if you are participating in a trial. We believe that this toolkit will be an extremely valuable and significant addition to the available information about clinical trials. I'd really like to encourage any of you who might be encountering cognitive issues, have a diagnosis of MCI, or have friends or family members who are in the same situation to seriously consider joining a trial. Watch for this new site on the Us Against Alzheimer's website. There will also be a tool that will allow you to enter your zip code and that will respond with the clinical trial sites closest to you. You can call these sites and make an appointment for a free neurological evaluation. So Geri, can you bring our prepared remarks to a close by reflecting on what living with Alzheimer's is like for you today.
Knowing more about Alzheimer's and developing coping strategies allows me the opportunity to recognize the preciousness of every mundane and extraordinary experience in my life. We with Alzheimer's are as smart as we ever were, but we are beginning to lose the bridge between our thoughts and our speech. We love and feel as we always have. We sometimes struggle to express it. We have goals and plans, albeit more limited than they were. Yet we take comfort and are happy in our accomplishments. We are still capable of complex, abstract thinking, but have forgotten what we did yesterday. We know that the disease has done much damage, and it is probably irreversible. But we want whatever slowing that the research and medical communities can achieve. We want the best quality of life we can attain. I am a different person today than I was before I was diagnosed. But this is not an entirely diminished state of being. I am much more present and in the moment. I laugh more spontaneously and feel the warmth of others more readily. I value people and beauty more deeply and viscerally. I know that I am limited, and at the same time, I feel expanded by the opportunity of knowing that what I experience is to be cherished, and that every moment is special.
Thank you, Lakelyn.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for getting us started by sharing your story. I was taking so many notes myself just about the various things that you have said, throughout these last couple minutes, and I just want to thank you both for sharing, first off your journey, and then for Geri, for you sharing those practical tips. I'm going to come back to those in just a few minutes because I think they were so powerful. They almost each deserve a few minutes just talking about them. But I think that you brought up so many great points as to how you can continue to maintain your independence by those various things that you mentioned. So I'm going to circle back to that in just a minute. But then you went on to talk about how you're continuing to live with hope. And I thought we could advance the slide here and just show everyone some visuals to all those things that you were just talking about, your advocacy work with the Alzheimer's Association, with Us Against Alzheimer's. Jim, I think it's so great that you went on to take an acting class, and Geri, you have gotten into bird photography. On the slide there, you can see one of her beautiful photos, and how you continue to get out and see our beautiful country. And Geri, you mentioned engaging with people and really taking every kind of moment and cherishing the experiences. There were so many great messages within what you just shared with us. So thank you so much for sharing. Did you have any other thoughts before we kind of jump into a few questions here, Jim or Geri?
That bottom left slide was taken in London. Geri was invited to speak to the board of directors of the Alzheimer's Association at the AAIC, the annual scientific conference, which was in London a couple of years ago. And that was a great honor, and that was taken over there. And you see Hoda.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I see Hoda from the Today Show. So tell us about that. What was that event? It looks like Move for Minds. Is that Maria Shriver's group?
Absolutely. And Maria was on the West Coast moderating, and Hoda was on the East Coast. And Geri, they didn't have a speaker, a microphone. And so Hoda held the microphone.
Oh, she she can do a great job on the Today Show, and she can be a great mic stand at the same time. So that's that's so great to see again, the various ways you continue to be an advocate. And Jim, thank you so much for sharing about clinical trials and your involvement. And I think one of my biggest takeaways from what you just said, Jim, was if you don't participate, you're on the placebo for life. That is something that I'm gonna quote you on going forward, because that's so true. Everyone can contribute, and so thank you for kind of debunking some of those myths about clinical trials and encouraging participation, because as you stated, that's where we're going to find the cure and treatments and preventative measures. And so we need people who are healthy just as much as people living with the ApoE4 gene, as you mentioned, and some of the other risk factors. So thank you so much for sharing. And then towards the end, we'll share those websites that you mentioned as to how people can sign up for clinical trials. So we'll get to that in just a little bit.
Great.
But I wanted to circle back to those tips that you offered up, Geri, on living with, or practical tips for living with Alzheimer's disease. And the first one you said was walking. When you're walking, talk only when necessary. And I thought that was a good tip. So can you remind us again why talking and walking kind of becomes a challenge? Or you said it reduces the risk of falling. Did you have anything else to add to that tip?
No, I think it's a new exercise. We're used to walking along with people and socializing and or looking at the birds. But apart from stopping at the curb to look at the traffic, that's very important. But you need to really look where your feet are taking you,
Yeah.
For a city dweller, for most of the time, it's very important. There's bumps, there's people, there's carriages, all kinds of things, but also your own feet, because your body in this state, you don't know, every morning, things can be a little different. You may not be so steady on your feet as you think you are when you went to sleep. And falls are very common. This is less of a problem in some suburban areas where most of the, getting around is in cars. But even, in suburban areas, you get out into the big malls and, into the stores. Bicycles coming by, or another thing that to zip by quickly. The actual thing of walking, out in public areas is something you have to concentrate on. So many broken ankles, arms, wrists, the hands. I mean, I would say 50% of the people I know have that, one time or another. So yeah.
It also means that you probably need to remind the people walking with you that you need not to talk to me, because I am often the problem, because I forget and I start bringing up things while we're talking. We live in Manhattan, in New York City, a lot of it, so we are walking as our major transportation, as one mode of major transportation. So I very often forget and bring up conversation and have to remind myself not to talk.
That's a great point. I actually was just visiting my sister in New York City, and to me, that's a very difficult city to navigate in and of itself. So those are some great tips that you offer up here. One of the other tips you mentioned, Geri, that I'm sure helps with, your walking and your balance was, improve your balance with yoga and exercise. And I would imagine maybe that yoga would be also good for kind of a meditation and that sort of thing. Do you find that to be the case, Geri?
Yes, in the sense that it takes you, to do yoga, it takes you out of the space, the noise of the day, the things that you're planning. You're just in that space doing yoga. I find the meditative time much more independently. For me, it's both. For different purposes, but yoga is meditative for a lot of people, and it's meditative probably for almost all. When you're really doing it, you really can't get your mind into too many, balancing the checkbook, or when am I going to Macy's or something. You're got to be kind of right there, which is meditative in itself.
Yes, those are some great points. Okay, I'm looking back. I wrote down all of your practical tips, and I was looking back at, you had mentioned keep my smartphone with me at all times. Can you talk about ways that you use your smartphone to kind of help maintain your sense of independence, connectedness? Do you have any apps you use that are especially helpful? Would you mind expanding a little bit about that tip?
Sure. Actually, it is a great help to me, and the most simplest, use of the phone. For example, I have been going probably for about 6 or 7 years down to the same restaurant, about 5 subway stops from my house, to meet a few friends, every month or so. And I would say in the past year, I can't remember the stop. Is it, 2 blocks up or 3 blocks down? And I take out my phone. And the first time it happened, it was kind of a surprise. I mean, lived here in the city most of my life, been going to the same place. And I couldn't remember if I got off, one stop or the other. But it was in my phone because it was there for the event. And I think that that's, just an example of, unfortunately with Alzheimer's, they don't send you a little card or a little flag that they're going to change the system. And now you won't remember, addresses as well. It's not automatic. And the reason you learn these things are when you're in a situation that the thing has happened. So there's so many things, just with that one example that you can expand on about all of a sudden, I don't remember Sally's last name. That happened. I have forgotten people's last names that I've known for 30 years. But it's there in my, in my phone book, and I can, track it back that way. So that's why I say I keep my smartphone with me at all time. I feel like it's my sort of, part of my brain that I've put in a little pouch now called my phone.
Lakelyn, we're very strong on our peers. We're not the most technically advanced generation, and some of our peers do not have smartphones and resist learning how to use them. But the same peers fear becoming senile or fear having dementia. And we so encourage them to overcome their resistance to smartphones because it is such an aid if one does start to experience cognitive decline. And it's so much easier to have become familiar with how to use the smartphone if you learn before you experience any loss of memory. So we really encourage everyone to get a smartphone and learn how to use it before any cognitive difficulties occur.
I would add that, having been way back in my 20s a visiting nurse, and how we taught people, particularly people with strokes, how to manage in home. And I see a great similarity here for people with Alzheimer's, where we need to find ways to have adaptive devices, in this case, a phone, to help us manage to get through the day. And we hold our memory very precious. You know, when people with Alzheimer's lose the ability to remember, you know, it's like they're insulted. Oh, I always do this, and I do it too. You know, I can do that. I always did it. But the name of the game is that we can't. And we need to find ways to substitute and subsidize our abilities. And we're so fortunate to have those today. And there's somebody on every street corner or in the mall that's going to help you out. People are very willing to do that and get you back on track if you have the information.
Those are great tips that you're sharing. I think we all, or anyone who has a smartphone, finds great value in them. And I can see how, if you're trying to, navigate directions or trying to, coordinate your schedule, how those simple smartphone kind of features could be so helpful. So thank you for sharing those. So if it's okay with you, Geri and Jim, we're going to open it up to some questions from our audience. Are you open to that?
Of course.
Sure.
Great. So if you're listening in, we would love to hear questions from you. As a reminder, you can type in your questions at any time. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. There's no such thing as a silly question, so please feel free to type in those questions, and I'll make sure to get them asked of our guests, Jim and Geri. So our first question actually came to us from what we call our live chat inbox. We have a email list where we promote chats like this, and we ask, if you can't make the chat, please send us your question ahead of time. So Kathy wrote in ahead of time, and she said, what advice do you have for someone who was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease? So would you mind answering Kathy's question on that? Any key takeaways that you think would be important for someone with a newer diagnosis?
So this is somebody who has been diagnosed. I think the first step, and that's sort of was my first step after taking a big gulp, is if you do have an association that supports, there's several of those organizations where you can go, and sometimes there are programs, word exercises, or groups, support groups. I think getting together with others is a very important thing, because your identity has just been a little disrupted from what you thought it was the day before you had been diagnosed. And it's good to sit with your peers, to laugh with your peers, to hear what strategies they have, to what they see funny in it, what they want to, get really mad about together. So I think that would be my first advice. There's also some good books out there that are helpful, mostly in being supportive.
I'm going to broaden it, Lakelyn, to include the care partner as well. And it's such a good question. I get angry when I think back to our diagnosis, which was initially MCI, mild cognitive impairment. We were sent home with absolutely nothing. No literature, no information, no suggestion that we go to the Alzheimer's Association. Just we were sent home with our emotions, which for me was, Geri kind of expected. the diagnosis. I did not, and I had a very hard time. So I guess the first thing I would say to, I forgot the individual's name, is to honor your emotions. What you're feeling is absolutely valid. It's all absolutely all right to be angry, to feel cheated, to be sad, and to experience that. But, you know, you can't let that rule your life. You've got to experience that and then be sure you can move on, and to work through those emotions to be sure you can come through them and go to a better place. I think the next thing I would suggest is to inform yourself. The Alzheimer's Association particularly has a wonderful website with a great deal of information. Some of it's concise and allows you to then drill down in more detail, but you can learn about and it's provided by stage, so it has what do I experience in the early stages, you know, what the symptoms are, and then where do I find help. And so I strongly suggest their website as a plethora of information about what your situation is. And then at the early stage, one of the first things is one of the most beneficial times to think about joining a clinical trial. So again, I would encourage an early person early diagnosed to think that soon about contacting a trial site to join a trial.
Thank you so much for that information. I hope that, Kathy, that you find that to be helpful. Unfortunately, Jim, hear all too often situations similar to what happened to you and Geri, where you got a diagnosis and were sent home with next to no information, and how frustrating and for such an emotional time in your life to not have that added support can be, I'm sure, causing even more emotions of frustration and uncertainty. So thank you for sharing, you know, where people can turn if they aren't given any information by their physician. So thank you so much for sharing that. So we have a few more questions. They're starting to kind of flood in now. So I thought that this was an interesting question. Sharon asks, how have you managed travel, vacations, that sort of thing? She says her husband has dementia, and she has traveled with her husband several times, but their last trip was pretty confusing for him. She said they kind of both came back changed people. He stayed in bed a lot more after he didn't have quite the appetite. So she's asking, you know, how do you manage travel? So any advice for Sharon on how you've gone about that part of your lives?
Okay, Geri's turning to me. Sharon, we handle our vacations. One of the pictures you saw was a recent trip for our 25th wedding anniversary. We went to Utah to the beautiful national parks there. Frankly, I make all the arrangements. Thank you. There's a nice slide. You see the upper right. Geri's not able to handle that. And we try to once we're there, we make a minimum number of moves. This was an 8-day trip, and we moved, I think, just twice because Geri needs time to orient herself. So we don't, you know, move every 2 days. We try as much as possible to have find restaurants where we will have pretty much the same cuisine as we have at home. We plan our days together, so we only try to do maybe half a day of, like this picture you see was a half-day trip into one of the parks, and then the afternoon, this was obviously not a sunny day, Geri could rest and I would walk around the town, or we would keep the activities minimized. Geri?
Yeah, I would just add that I'm very fortunate in that I'm a pretty calm person. But traveling is very destabilizing because everything is different. And with Alzheimer's, it's you kind of, the expression of reading the room, it's bigger than that. You have to read the world you're in. And when you move from one place to the next, you have to read it again because you don't absorb it in the same pace as people without Alzheimer's. So I think the real key is to accept yourself with what you can do in terms of moving around, changes during the day, multiple activities, and do what you can do that you can absorb in the pace and timing of the Alzheimer's world that we live in. It sounds like it's diminishing in a way. You have more time to soak things up, to know where you are, to see things you wouldn't see as you buzz along, and it buzzed along in the old days. So it's not diminishing necessarily. It's just different.
Mm-hmm. I like how you phrase that, Geri. It just looks a little different, and I love that you're still able to get out and travel. And thank you for sharing those tips for how you guys make vacations a possibility, and yet give yourselves time to acclimate to the new environment and that sort of thing. So, Suzanne, we hope that you found that to be helpful, or Sharon, pardon me. We hope, Sharon, that you find that to be helpful. Okay, we have another question that just came in from Gail. She asks, have you ever joined an adult day group to help with socialization? And I'm going to add to Gail's question, if you haven't ever joined an adult day group, have you talked about future plans? Maybe I'll add that to her question. I hope that's not too overwhelming for you all.
I have not had that kind of group, but I have had a group at the Alzheimer's Association where we went weekly for word games. And at a point of time, down the road, that I might have a longer type of program. I found the camaraderie of my people, as I think of them. Our sense of humor is an insider sense, and it really, we buoy one another up. And it isn't quite the program that the caller is talking about, but the experience I have had where I went weekly, we had an hour and a half, did word games and puzzles, and that experience was very, very uplifting, and gave us one another a lot of ways of looking at things and how to manage things together. It just would come up casually.
We have found that there are such programs in our neighborhood in New York, and have discussed that at the appropriate time we very well may make use of those facilities.
Thank you for sharing that. And Gail wrote back and said, I really like the idea of a word game group. It keeps you challenged with something you love. So Gail appreciates your comments, and as we all do. So thank you for answering Gail's question. So we have an anonymous listener who has written in. This is kind of their question. So we've lived a very active life after diagnosis in 2010. And now he, who must be the individual diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, sleeps more and more. He's asking, how much is too much or too little sleep? I encourage eating and walking, but is this enough or too much? So I guess this individual's kind of wondering, as you progress through the disease, Geri, have you kind of seen yourself needing more sleep? Or do you have any thoughts around this for this listener who is trying to kind of figure out how much sleep their loved one needs, or how much encouragement is too much or kind of too little? Does that question make sense? I hope so.
Yeah. Yes, I think I have to put something up front on that, though. I think as a healthcare person, the first step really with the two people involved is if this is a change, and then there needs to possibly be a trip to the doctor or whoever is their healthcare person, in the event that something else is going on, because, you know, fatigue and that sort of thing is sometimes associated with other conditions, and is associated with age, depression, you know, mental issues. So it's very hard to know what's going on if there's a change. But if there's a change, then, you know, and they're not, the people involved are not able to figure out what's going on or why there's a change, then I would say the first step would be professional eyes on these situations. Personally, I, as something have been sort of more worked out for me in other health, getting to that point. I feel like my sleeping and so forth is more regular. I was having interrupted sleeping, walking, finding myself in other rooms in the very early days. So I think understanding the disease plus getting some other health things straightened out. So I think that's the first step, to see what's going on, if something is going on beyond the impact of Alzheimer's.
Geri, thank you so much for sharing that. You make such a great point that if there's any sort of sudden change, that is a clue that it's really important to get your loved one to their medical professional. So thank you for sharing that. And as you were sharing that, it made me a question kind of pop up in my head with your medical background, Geri. You know, how has that impacted, you know, maybe your recognizing of the signs at the start of your development of Alzheimer's disease? That had an impact on your journey as a medical professional?
Right. It certainly did. You know, because there was not only my education in that area, but my family history. So I kind of knew I could play out the story without getting in any trouble or needlessly bring things up till things were there. So it does make a difference. And I recently, we were talking to some people, and again, with that person's medical background, you know, he's taking a more self-directive path and making choices that someone not familiar with the outcomes or the alternatives. For me, I think it has made my path easier.
I think it's also uniquely qualified us for the role that we've taken on as advocates. Lakelyn,
yeah.
I think we're much better qualified to answer questions one-on-one. We do a lot of one-on-one work, and we're much better at that, given Geri's background. And I think just the feeling of being prepared or able to do that or qualified to do that is much stronger, both for Geri and for myself, given her administrative, nursing, CEO background in long-term care facilities.
Thank you for sharing that extra insight with us. Gosh, I could talk to you guys for hours and hours, but we only have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to quickly switch to the resource slide just so we make sure that everyone gets to see those resources. So Jim, you had talked about how Us Against Alzheimer's will be releasing in the near future a new tool. So we wanted to give you all their website so that you can start to follow them. So when that new tool becomes available, that you can get access to it. So their website is usagainstalzheimers.org. And then there are 2 sites you can go to today if you wanted to learn more about clinical trials, and that's trialmatch.alz.org. And that one does not work if you put www. in front of it. We tried it earlier. But then there's antidote.me. So both of those are sites where you can go to learn more about clinical trials. And then we have a couple of our resources on there, helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. That's where we'll repost this recorded live chat, and you can go back and listen to others. And then we also have a Facebook group. If you haven't become a member of that, please go out and like our Facebook group. It's Remember for Alzheimer's is the name of it. We also have a couple other websites, Confidence to Care and CaregiverStress.com. And if you want to learn more about Home Instead, of course, our website is homeinstead.com. And then earlier, Jim mentioned the Alzheimer's Association's website. They have lots of great information out there. I probably go to that site several times a week just to get the latest information and to get, a concise definition of certain terms. So that site is alz.org, and you can find support groups through their website as well to find one nearest you. I know earlier we talked about support groups. So wanted to share those quick resources for you, with all of you, before we take our last question. So Gail wrote back in, and actually, Jim, this question is for you. She was asking, are you willing to share about any adjustments that you have had to make in becoming Geri's primary caregiver? But I think you maybe would prefer the term care partner. It sounds like you guys definitely have a partnership in this journey. So would you mind speaking to that a little bit, Jim?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question, Gail. Yes, I prefer the term care partner still. I don't feel like I'm a caregiver yet. I think I will evolve to a caregiver, but that's sometime in the future. Yeah, I've had to become, I think a care partner over time a good care partner becomes more patient, becomes more understanding. All the things I wished I could have been 30 years ago as a new partner. You expand in ways that you really didn't think about. You're more patient. I'm more kind. I don't argue about the things that aren't important. I don't need to have my own way anymore. I'm exaggerating, but things that aren't important, like the temperature in the room, that's really not important. I don't need to, because Geri has less time that she's going to be cogent, and I want that time to be just as wonderful as it can be. And I probably have more time, so I want to optimize her time. So I guess that's one of my primary goals. And so to that end, I think more about what I can do to optimize her time. So yeah, I think the changes around that have become easier for me.
Jim, thank you so much for sharing from your perspective. I think that, and Gail even wrote back, she said, great comment. Care partners are much better description. So we thank you all for your great questions. Real quick before we hang up and say goodbye to Jim and Geri, I did want to just tell you all about our next live chat. It will be coming up at the end of March. We're going to be talking about faith's role in dementia, managing dementia, so spirituality and caregiving. We really haven't talked about that aspect. It can be very important for so many family caregivers, family care partners, people who maybe have just got a new diagnosis. So we'll be talking more about faith's role coming up at the end of March. So registration will be up in a couple days. We're just finalizing the details on that, and you can register at helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. But before we say goodbye, Jim and Geri, I just want to thank you again so much for joining us today, for taking the time to talk to us about how you continue to live with hope and be an advocate and get involved in clinical trials. What you are doing is so important. And we just really thank you for sharing your part of your day with us and letting us learn from your experience. So thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us, Lakelyn.
Well, we wish you both a great rest of your day. I know it's a lot warmer where you are than where I am here in chilly Nebraska, but we wish all of you a great rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.